a man who needs very little introduction. It's a bit of a joke, because if you say somebody needs no introduction and then you introduce them, you just contradicted yourself. But Davie Rood, the CEO of the Efficient Group, CEO, I always keep on promoting you. From the Efficient Group, Davie, there's only one Davie Rood, and this is him, and he is going to tell us a little more about the economy. Davie, over to you.
Dankie Mike. Welkom hier so in Pretoria. About time. Goeiemôre almal, baie dankie vir Mike vir die uitnodiging. Okay, so my job is to talk about the economy, and it's a little bit like going to a braai. And there's a certain way of doing these sort of things. If you go to a braai and meet somebody new, there's a certain way of sort of treating this guy. If you go to a braai, for example, you know about braai in Pretoria, you never touch the braaier's meat. You just don't do that. You also don't give him advice about how to braai. You certainly never touch his wors. You just leave that. And then if you meet somebody new, there's a certain way of greeting them for the first time. For example, it's appropriate if you ask the guy what he does, and then he would say, I'm a dentist, and it's appropriate to say, listen, but I've got and just talk a little bit about teeth. If he's a plumber, then you tell him about your leaking geyser, for example. So there's a sort of kind of a protocol at the braai. When somebody comes to you and says, listen, so what do you do? And I say, I'm an economist. They say, the reaction is always the same. They step 2 steps back and say, oh, that's interesting. And then the question is always the same. So who's the economy? And I never know how to answer that question. So who's the economy? So I'm going to try to answer this question this morning about how the economy is. Before I actually get to the actual economy, I just want to touch on 1 or 2 things that has been happening, 1 or 2 trends that I've picked up that I think are very important for us all to understand. One has to do with a simple number, and that's economic growth. So economic growth is what you produce in a country, all the goods and services that you produce in a country, and you compare one period to a previous period. Usually we compare this year to a previous year, or this quarter to a previous quarter. We make some adjustments and so on, but basically it comes down to one thing. How much do you produce? And if you produce more over time, then of course that's good for your economy, because then people are getting wealthier. And today, economies typically, smallish economies typically grow at about 5% or so, 3, 4, 5% or so. Big economies like the US economies usually grow at about 2% or perhaps a little bit more. The US economy currently growing at a rate between 4 or 5%, which is actually very, very, very fast economic growth. But that was not sort of the norm. That's not what the rate of economic growth was not too long ago. And what I mean with not too long ago, I mean 200 years ago. And 200 years ago is not a long time. So 200 years ago, until about 200 years ago, economies did not grow. In fact, the living standard of the average European 200 years ago was probably lower than the living standard of the Romans, 2,000 years ago, for example. So economies don't grow. So what we've experienced the past 200 years is really something exceptional. So what happened during the time of the Industrial Revolution, economic growth started to accelerate. And eventually we had all sort of new technologies and a way that we manage our economies and a lot of political changes. And by the 1900s, the economy started growing much, much faster. And in some instances, we could see economic growth as much as 12%. That was the highest for a big economy like China, also not too long ago. So economic growth, what we're currently experiencing, about 3, 4, 5% for the world economy, or 3% for the world economy at the moment, is something extraordinary. This is likely to continue to happen. Now, there are reasons why the economy is growing faster. And there are 2 basic ingredients in the economy. You put labor into this system, and you put, let's call it capital, into the system. Capital can take the various forms. It can be money, it can mean a factory or a tractor or whatever the case may be. And a combination of labor and capital that you put into the system results in more productivity or more production. Basically, that's what happens. So there are 2 major drivers behind economic growth the last 200 years. The one is skills, people getting better at what they're doing, and the other one is technology, let's call it capital, putting this into the system. Now, here's something very, very interesting happening. Some people are predicting that capital can become productive and start producing stuff without labor. And that's called artificial intelligence in many instances. And we're in a second phase of this thing called artificial intelligence. And some economists are actually predicting that the world economy can grow as fast as 20 or even 30% per year if this whole thing starts really kicking in. Now we're talking about amazing economic growth happening. Because of what's been happening to economic growth the last couple of 100 years or so, something else has been happening as well. And things are getting cheaper. Not only are things getting cheaper, they're getting much cheaper. And when I talk about things, I mean typically things that are manufactured in factories or on farms or whatever the case may be. Things are getting cheaper, and not only cheaper, a lot cheaper. So if you get into this new cycle where things will be produced really at grand scale and much, much cheaper, everything basically will become much cheaper, and we are entering a period of excessive abundance of just about everything. There are exceptions. Certain things are getting more expensive. And the things that are typically getting more expensive are things like, for example, services. Services of certain specialists, services like house cleaners, for example, people looking after people. Those services are getting more expensive. So already you can see where you have to, how you have to guide your kids, where they need to study. Of course, you need to be an artificial intelligence expert. You have to be able to, you still need engineers in factories and things like that. But we're probably going to need far more people in a service industry, people that service other people in one way or the other. So that's one trend I just wanted to highlight. I just want to, and there are many other things, but my time is a bit of a time constraint. I just want to talk about something else that I'm very excited about, and that is how money is evolving. I'll get to the economy just now. So I just read this morning in the newspapers that there's a new kind of money. It's called ZARU, if I don't misunderstand it. It's a so-called stable coin. Now, it's based on a blockchain technology. So the world of money is changing, and again, the world of money is changing quite dramatically. So if you go into history, you will see money evolved. Money started actually not as something that was discovered or something that was used to facilitate trade. That's not the origin of money. The origin of money is actually credit. Somebody owes somebody else something, and you represented that credit on a piece of wood or a piece of paper, and that eventually became money, and then it started being used to facilitate trade. Now, that's an important distinction, because if you understand that money started off as being credit, then you would understand the new kind of money, like, for example, Bitcoin better. So keep that in the back of your minds. But money evolved over time, and whenever money evolved from one thing to something else, there was this increase in economic activity. When we started trading, barter trade, that led to this huge increase in economic activity. Then we discovered other kinds of money that we use, shells or cattle or whatever, and that also started increasing. And then eventually we moved into precious metals, and that moved into paper money, and that moved into electronic money. And every time when money moved, evolved into something else, it led to this increase in economic activity. Now there's a new kind of money. And let's call it crypto money, if you like. Now, I'm not telling you run out and go and buy Bitcoin. That's not what I'm saying. The important part here is the underlying technology called the blockchain technology. Now, there are two ways where the authorities can get involved in the blockchain technology, and they are doing it already. You can either follow the Europeans, and the Europeans decided that they are going to start creating central bank digital currencies. Now, central bank digital currency is pretty much the same as Bitcoin, with the major difference is that it is a programmable money, which means that whoever issues this money can actually change the code or can program that. And if they see that you drink too much or you smoke too much or whatever, then they can penalize you. Or they can program your wallet so that you can't buy alcohol. It will be impossible to evade taxes, for example. So that's Big Brother on steroids, just by the way. That's a central bank digital currency approach. And that's typically what the Europeans want to do. Already busy with that. The other approach is a so-called stable coin approach. Now, stable coin approach, in simple terms, what happens? You bring somebody money, 100 Rand, for example, and this is the new ZARU. You give him 100 Rand, he will take the 100 Rand and put it in the bank, and it will give you a stable coin, and you will get the stable coin in your phone. And you want to do that because the transaction costs are much, much lower. And the guy issuing the stable coin, he wants to do that because he gets the interest on the money in the bank. There are two aspects here that are very important. Of course, the danger is that if you bring back the stable coin, the money is not in the bank anymore. And that is a major danger. And that's why you need auditors and so on. But there are two aspects that we need to understand. So where is this guy going to put the money? And one of the biggest buyers today in the United States of American treasury bills are actually stablecoin issuers. So they're buying American treasury bills, and that, of course, got an impact on interest rates and on the yield curve in the United States. They can buy other stuff with that as well. They can buy equities or gold or whatever the case might be. So it will affect and it will have an influence on the world of finance in terms of where that money is actually parked. The second thing is the payment part of the stablecoins. The reason why people use stablecoins because transaction costs are much, much lower, and stablecoins do not recognize borders, like all cryptocurrencies. So you can send the stablecoin to whoever you want to send it to. And now we've got the Rand stablecoin, and let's see what's going to happen, whether people will start using that. But the US dollar stablecoins already exist, and it is now possible for you to go on your whatever platform you use, Luno, put 100 million rand into Luno, buy 100 million rands worth of Bitcoin on Luno, use your 100 million rands worth of Bitcoin on Luno and buy a US dollar stable coin, and send 100 million rands worth of US dollar stable coin to your kids that live in the Netherlands, for example. And you've just externalized 100 million rands without asking anybody's permission. So we have foreign exchange regulations in South Africa, which limits you to R1 million per year that you can take out of the country. Now, basically, it is possible to simply ignore foreign exchange regulations. It becomes irrelevant. And it is quite possible that these new stable coins, whichever one starts to dominate, will start pushing out some of the smaller currencies. So why use the Rand if we can use US dollar stable coins? And that means also that institutions like the central bank becomes irrelevant. Because why use it? So that's the kind of possibilities, things that can potentially happen with this new currency called stable coins, or maybe central bank digital currencies like the Europeans are doing that. Okay, I just want to mention those two major changes that are happening. Now, let me get to just the world economy. I'll just walk around the world economy quickly and just touch on a couple of economies and how they are doing. If there are any questions later about specific countries, I'll try to answer that as well. I'm just going to touch on some of the bigger ones. I start in the East. The Russian economy doing surprisingly well. Chances are within a year or even less, the Russian economic growth is likely to slow down quite significantly, which will have an impact potentially on the war in Ukraine. That's the one. The Chinese economy currently growing at about 5%. Those are the official numbers. I don't believe that. I disagree with that. I think the economic growth is weaker than that. And the Chinese economy is unlikely to be that massive engine of economic growth going forward. The Japanese economy, that's also an economy that's really struggling for various reasons. The Japanese yen, for example, is an exceptionally cheap currency. If you want to go to a rich country where your rand goes quite far, go to Japan. It's cheap to go to Japan. The Indian economy doing very well. Of all the big economies, the Indian economy is doing the best, and especially now with the deal between Narendra Modi and Donald Trump, where there's all of a sudden big buddies again, I think the Indian economy starts growing faster. And also remember, the Indian economy just entered into some special agreement with the Europeans. So that's a big economy that's going to drive the world economy going forward. The European economy, old, not going anywhere, but they're rich. And the Europeans are a bunch of socialists anyway. There's a lot of interference in the working of the economy, and the productivity growth in the United States is more than double that of the Europeans for the past 10 years or so. The US is simply growing away from the Europeans. The American economy is doing exceptionally well. We talk about 4 or 5% economic growth. We're waiting for the final numbers for last year, but the US economy is doing very well. The US dollar is likely to remain the most important reserve currency in the world, but other currencies can start eating into the dominance of the US dollar in terms of payment systems. So don't think the BRICS countries will create their own reserve currency. And if there are questions about that, I can try to answer that a little bit later as well. So that's roughly what's going on in the world. Of course, politically, the world is a different place. Donald Trump, whether you like him or not, he turned the world upside down. And in future, it's going to be a different world in which we are living in. It's important for South Africa to not get on his wrong side. AGOA agreement, for example, has just been finalized yesterday. So the question is, which countries? There are 30 potential countries that can benefit from AGOA in Africa. The question is, will Donald Trump allow South Africa to be one of those countries? We don't know yet. Let's see what's going to happen. But just also keep in mind, he's got much bigger sticks that he can really hurt South Africa with. All right, so let's get to South Africa. I'm not going to venture into your space that much. I just want to touch something about the ANC and the origins of the ANC. The ANC is the oldest political party, I think, in Africa, if you will correct me on that. And it's certainly the oldest political party in South Africa. So the roots of the ANC goes back in the early 1900s. In the early 1900s, there was a movement, the world was divided in two, basically. Let's call it a liberal or the individualist sort of centered Western world and a socialist or communist eastern part of the world. And that was, of course, driven by the theories of a guy with the name of Karl Marx. Communism actually goes back to the old Greeks, actually, but Karl Marx, he formalized that, or he codified communism in a weird way. And in a weird way, and again, we can talk about that a little bit later, I think communism, to implement it in a modern economy is probably going to be easier than what it was then. But remember, Karl Marx, the center of his ideology was about the exploitation of labor. He had something called the labor value theory, and everything was built around labor. And that's the origin of the ANC as well. That's the ideology of the ANC. So everything is about exploitation, the bad capitalists, and the poor workers that are being exploited. Because at that time, and we can have some sympathy for then, because workers worked in very horrible conditions in factories and things like that. But that's an ideological origin of the ANC. And that's also why the ANC has got labor as part of the tripartite alliance in the form of COSATU, and that's also why they have the Communist Party as part of the tripartite alliance. So the ideology started more than 100 years ago. That's the origin of the ideology of the ANC. So that's what they stand for. Flowing from that, you get policies that fit into that. Things like minimum wages, labor, again. Things like, for example, the state wants to do everything. The state is responsible for everything. The ANC is the vanguard party. So the policies that the ANC that stand for today are policies that flow from their ideology, which was actually more applicable to 100 years ago, the world of 100. So the ideology is old and wrong, misplaced, and the policies are old and wrong and misplaced. The third thing that the ANC is characterized by is cadre deployment. We deploy people because they support your country, your political party, and not necessarily good at what they're doing. And another word for cadre deployment is simply incompetence. And the fourth one that the ANC is quite often known for is exceptionally high levels of corruption. So those, and put those four things together, and we have what we have in South Africa, what we have today in South Africa. And I'm afraid, if you look at the South African economy, as long as the ANC is the dominant political party, this economy will not grow. Because it's like asking the Pope to change his religion. The religion of the ANC is a developmental state. It's something that they want to centralize everything. They want to be in control of everything. It doesn't work in a modern economy. They need to change their religion, the ANC, and they're probably not going to do that. In the meantime, of course, they're on the take and lining their own pockets. Okay, just a few things. What's been happening the past year or so in South Africa? And I can tell you, amazing things have been happening in South Africa the past year or so. If you look at the financial markets, what the financial markets did very, very well. The answer is why. Now, for one, the rand appreciated quite nicely. Of course, the US dollar itself is under pressure, so the dollar is going down. If the dollar goes down, other thing goes up, and the rand went up. The rand's currently just about 16 to the US dollar. Why is that? Now, there are many reasons for the weaker US dollar, certainly. The commodity price is going up. That's supportive of the currency as well. We were off the grey list. That's supportive of the currency as well. But crucially important, and I think the press do not give nearly enough attention to this, is that inflation targets were lowered to 3%. It used to be 3 to 6, and now it's 3%. Now, that's crucially important. That's a very important reason why the rand appreciated very much. One of the reasons why foreigners do not want to invest in South Africa is that they take a currency risk. So if you invest in South Africa, you buy rands and you do something with that, you buy bonds or whatever the case may be. If you sell those bonds and you take the rands out and you convert it back into dollars, in the meantime, the rand weakened, and then you lose because of that. So if you convert it back into dollars. So currency volatility was a major reason why foreigners did not want to invest in South Africa. And currency volatility happens usually when your inflation rate is high and somebody else's inflation rate is low. And now with lower inflation targets, not only at lower inflation targets, but also inflation expectations are coming down. People believe inflation is going to start coming down. The Reserve Bank is keep on hammering this drum, saying we're going to kill inflation, we're going to bring it down, we're going to bring it down. People starting to believe that. And now actually inflation is also starting to come down, and the volatility of the rand is reduced. You take this risk away and more money is flowing into South Africa. And that's why the bond market did so well recently. Foreign money coming into South Africa, but local people as well. And that's why the equity market is also doing quite well in South Africa. So the financial markets reacted very, very quickly and very positive to a few changes in policy, like, for example, inflation targets being lowered, and a few changes in things like, for example, the grey list on which we are not on anymore. So that's the financial markets. Unfortunately, that is not the economy. The positive impact on the financial markets, like, for example, lower interest rates and a stronger currency, will spill over into the real economy, and it's likely to support growth in the real economy. So expect some of that at various levels. But unfortunately, the real change in the real economy is not happening yet because of the wrong macroeconomic policies. And the wrong macroeconomic policies are things like, for example, expropriation, things like, for example, so-called BEE, or even the NHI, or even some of these other, and also very crucially important is the local authorities are not functioning. The state-owned enterprises are not functioning. They are dysfunctional. They have been destroyed financially and operationally by the ANC. And the national accounts that the Minister of Finance is responsible for is also in deep trouble. I'll get to that just now. I just want to touch on one or two things. And particularly one thing that is standing out for me, and that is BEE, so-called BEE. We do not have black economic empowerment in South Africa. We do not have that. But if you really want to, ask yourself this question. If I want to empower my children, what would you do? The first thing I would do is give them a loving, safe house where they can grow up. The second thing, make sure that world-class skills development. Make sure that they have an environment in which they can operate, which is a safe place to go to. Make sure they have economic opportunities. Make sure they have working local authorities. Those are the sort of things that you really need if you want to empower people. If you look at South Africa, for example, the quality of South Africa's education or skills development is not only bad, it is of the worst in the world. And the people suffering because of that are black people mostly. If you want to empower black people, give them world-class skills. The environment in which people live in South Africa is very dangerous. Look at the crime statistics. And who suffer most from that? It is black people. You are not empowering black people because you put them in a dangerous environment. The same goes for the local authorities. The same goes for just about everything. We do not have black economic empowerment in South Africa, but we do have black billionaire empowerment. That we do have. Okay, I just wanted to mention that. Then I want to get to the Minister of Finance. The 25th this year, the budget of the Minister of Finance, he will, I think so, and I hope it will be accepted this time because this coalition government is all over the place. But there are signs, the budget, the fiscal accounts of the Minister of Finance is in very deep trouble. Each one of you owe more than 100,000 rand more than what you think you owe, because that's a debt of the Minister of Finance, standing at close to 5 trillion rand. As a percentage of GDP, it's about 76% of GDP, and it's likely to keep on going up. Now, the big problem with the debt of the Minister of Finance is not the debt itself, but it's the rate of economic growth. That is the major problem. Remember the Minister of Finance? He gets money out of economic growth like anybody else. And if the economy doesn't grow, then he can't get enough revenue. And that is the reason why SARS is so exceptionally aggressive recently. And I think SARS is overstepping the line, just by the way. The economy is not growing, and now they're forcing more, trying to force more money out of the system. And the tax base in South Africa is exceptionally narrow. Under these difficult circumstances, the Minister of Finance is actually doing not too bad a job. We're currently running a primary surplus, which means if we take interest out of it, the fiscal accounts seem to be doing a little bit better. And it seems to me as the debt trajectory can stabilize a little bit because of the very aggressive SARS, but also because the Minister of Finance is trying to keep a bit of a lid on state expenditure. Talking about economic growth. Economic growth in South Africa last year, we're waiting for the final numbers, probably just over 1% or so, which is far too weak. We need economic growth at least at 1.5% just to keep track with population growth, and we can grow this economy at 4, 5, and 6%. And you know what? I think we're ready for that. Looking at the reaction on the financial markets when a few things were adjusted, see what the financial market did. This country is ready for growth. This country can grow at 3, 4, and 5%. There's one thing standing in the way of economic growth in South Africa, and that thing is called the ANC. But now listen, we're going to listen what Bonsai, what he's got to say about that, but I've got a sense that we're getting rid of the ANC, and it is about time. It is about time for this economy to grow at the potential that it certainly can achieve, and that certainly is 5 or even more %. And then you're going to see what's going to happen to unemployment. Then you're going to see what's going to happen to job creation and wealth creation and all those good things that are associated with much stronger economic growth. Dankie dat julle na my geluister het.